Hey, Jim Toscano here, and welcome to the Monday night live stream. Tonight, I have a very special guest who I'm going to announce in just a moment. But before I get to that, I just want to mention next week on the show, Alfredo Reyes Jr. will be on the show, which will be a lot of fun. And And I have my accountant coming on in October because I thought it'd be really fun to share some practical business skills for drummers. So Alan Friedman will be on with me in October. My buddy Mark Feldman is going to be on in October, and a whole bunch of other drummers that we're working out dates right now. So stay tuned for more fun podcasts. And I just want to mention my companies and give a shout out to Prologix Percussion, Jason Edwards, and Andrew, who's my artist rep, and they're such great guys and so supportive. So I just want to give a shout out to Prologix, Offset Pedals, of course, Sabian Cymbals, Black Magic Designs, and Focusrite Audio. So just some thank yous, and Vader Drumsticks, of course. So all my peeps. And I also just want to give a quick shout out to Annika Nils because she sent me her pad book, and Annika was on the show recently. This book is seriously ridiculous. There's like 300 pages of exercises. This is like the phone book with rudiments. So Annika's pad book, really, really cool. And I want to mention my buddy Klaus Hessler's Tala Diddle, which is conical drumming meets conical counting meets rudimental drumming. This is bananas. But I just want to mention my buddy Klaus's book. Yeah, man. And my guest tonight is also an author. And I actually mention him in my book on the double bass page. But so he came up playing with the Good Rats early in his career, and the legendary Good Rats. And also he's played with the likes of Dee Snider and Widowmaker, and has a really extensive recording career. And some of the people on that list, one, Taylor Dane, which I have to ask him something about, but also, he was programming drums in the early days. He went with the flow of how the recording industry was going, programming for the likes of Celine Dion and tons of other artists. And he's actually done some TV work there was a spin-off of Sesame Street that we'll probably talk about. And he's wrote this book, Double Bass Drumming. And he's a fellow New Yorker and a great guy. And without any further ado, my guest tonight, Joe Franco. Yeah, baby. And I'm gonna play a little piece of this track real quick, because you might not hear this. The audience hears it. A little double bass shuffle. Swinging. Yeah, baby. It's probably going to get muted by Facebook. Jerks. Yeah, Joe. Great to have you, man. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jim. Nice to be here.
I hope that intro was okay.
That was from '75. That was our second record.
Yeah. I mean, I think it still sounds great. I know there's a long history with that. I know there were some other drummers earlier on, right, before you joined the band. But the band really kind of took on a presence, I think, with your entering the scene. And that double bass shuffle, I love the feel of that. And I'm doing a book called The Shuffle Evolution, and I want to put your shuffle in that book.
Sounds good.
Yeah, man. So welcome. And the other thing I forgot to mention in the intro is that you have a company called Beatstreet Productions, which is where a lot of those recording sessions were coming from, the early days of Beat Street. And we'll definitely have to check into the chat, because I already see some friends in there that are going to mention things and ask questions. But how is the business since, with Beat Street, since the pandemic? Did it affect it? What's happening in the business world for you?
Well, that's wild. I had no idea what to think about the pandemic, because the first 3 or 4 weeks were just downright scary, And we were in the middle of 3 different television shows with Sesame Street.
Oh my God.
Because the Sesame Workshop, because Sesame Street's their television show, their flagship show, but they do other shows, animated shows, and we're wondering how we're going to finish this. So, I'm talking with my engineers, and what we decided to do is let's get Elmo and Big Bird and all these Muppets on FaceTime in their house or in their apartment and get them rigs and let's see what that closet sounds like and let's see what that, we basically through just FaceTime and, sending them gear wound up doing these 3 shows.
Oh my
and
God.
and it's so they loved it. I mean, they loved it. We saved the productions and all. We kept everything flowing, and we basically reinvented our business. And
That's amazing.
it was really gratifying once these shows came out to know the conditions they were recorded in.
That's amazing. So you sent sort of remote rigs to all of the talent, right?
Yeah,
So sort of an interface, microphone, headphones, and a computer or something?
exactly,
Wow.
exactly. And we controlled the computer from our end remotely. And
So
we
smart.
kept the show rolling. And it was kind of weird. The pandemic did some good things in effect. We learned a lot of new technology. Ways of beaming out mixes. We did a show where Ludacris was doing the music, and he's in Atlanta. The production company was in Dublin, and we were doing live mixes with live tweaking with no delay, with this new technology called Clearview. Anyway, that we can
I was going to
me and
ask you what
maybe
you
could
guys.
talk about that
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah.
But
That-
for the drum audience,
yeah. That's cool. I mean, listen, a lot of
yeah.
people were trying to accomplish, rehearsing and composing together over, different platforms. And there were a few things that worked and a few things that didn't. I'm trying to think. There's a specific platform that a lot of people were testing out at the time. Wasn't Clearview, it was something else. But not having very good luck with it. If you have one person with a slow computer, one person with a fast computer, it just
Yeah.
not going to happen. But that's so smart that you guys you kept it flowing. You rolled with it, which is kind of what we do as drummers, right? You just roll with the punches and do it.
And the whole work from home thing became commonplace. So now, I basically, I have my laptop out, my pad, and I work from home.
Nice. Yeah. By the way, so we talked about this a little in the pre-hang. So you're in your home
Yeah.
studio, and behind you you have your like main DW kit. Then you have this cool Ludwig Beatles kit to your.
That's my silent kit. I have the
Right,
Zildjian
silent stroke.
silent cymbals and the silent Remo heads, and I play that when there's somebody next door watching television, and
Nice.
it's kind of cool when you just Jones on to play some drums and you can't make a lot of noise.
Yeah. I mean, that stuff actually works pretty well. I did a little promo with my buddy Mike Sorrentino and Don Famularo for Sabian's quiet cymbals. And
Yeah.
they sounded pretty good. It was fun. We had silent stroke heads on the drums. By the way, also over your right shoulder, I see a couple muraled bass drums, or at least one muraled bass drum.
Oh, those are antiques. They're Ludwig bass drums from the 20s.
Nice.
It's a whole kit. I've got the coconuts. I've got the original William Left Ludwig. Actually, no, it was Ludwig and Company, patent pending foot pedal. The
Yeah.
original foot pedal they made.
Oh, that's
Um,
amazing.
I could show it to you.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, let me see it. That's awesome. Yeah, baby.
Here it is.
I had one of those and I gave it to, wow, nice. That's in very good shape.
Oh, yeah. Well,
Nice.
yeah, it's in good shape, but I mean, look at this thing.
Come on, you don't take that on the road, Joe? What the hell? Um, I had that same bass drum pedal. I actually gave mine to Vince Giordano, who has a band called the Nighthawks, which is a 20s revival thing. Vince does it extremely well, extremely authentically. They have a standing gig at Stella's in the city. And they've done like Woody Allen movies and Boardwalk Empire, like really authentic 20s music. And I played in that band, and there was a bass drum with the light bulbs in it, like a blue one for the lake and a red one for the sun.
The other bass drum in back of that one has a AC cord. You plug it in. It's a ballroom dancing scene, and they dance.
That's awesome. So fun, man.
It's a 28.
Aren't drums fun? It's like no matter what, whether you're playing them or you have like cool old drums around, it's always a good time. And I see that little Chinese tom-tom on the floor, that little Chinese tom-tom right in front of the bass drums, right?
Oh, yeah, that's part of the kit, though.
Yeah, part of the kit.
With the coconuts and the whole thing.
Yeah.
I need to set it up somewhere because it's like, it's a museum piece, with the coconuts go on top and the tack tom, and the original snare is somewhere around here. But, I just like walking past it, It just, right. It's a cool vibe, to walk past my Ringo kit every day and
brings you joy, right?
It does.
So I want to dig into kind of like early in your story, because I just want to know, I'm always interested, and I always ask this question kind of in two things. One is I want to know about the start, but I also want to know about if you can sort of find the feeling, rekindle that feeling that you got when you had the thought to play drums. So like that feeling of like almost like a little in your chest, and you see the drums and you're like, that's what I want to do. Like, do you remember that moment? Can you feel that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm like most people my age, we saw Ed Sullivan with the Beatles, and I happened to be really fortunate in that I was living in one of those like Italian households where my grandparents were there, one of my uncles, and then we were on another floor in Brooklyn, my uncle played drums, and he had a Red Sparkle WFL kit, and he got married. The drums were just sitting there collecting dust because he had like a straight gig, and he stopped doing the club dates. I used to do club dates, and it was a 3-piece kit. It was like a 22 by 12, 9 by 13, and 5.5 snare. And they were just sitting there, and then the Beatles come out, and the Beatles are a big thing. It was like, clearly, but it wasn't only the Beatles, and they were a great band. It was the first time it was like a band. It was like a gang,
Yeah.
If you had like Johnny around the corner that played guitar, and Timmy played bass, and you could just get together and be like a gang. And before that, it was like the singer and the backup band.
Yeah.
But the Beatles made it like you can have this little gang, and that's what was really special about it. And that's exactly what we all did. We found the Billy down the block that played guitar. We of course, he always played at the drummer's house,
Exactly.
But the moment probably came before I actually assembled musicians. The moment came when my uncle showed me a couple of beats. He showed me 2 beats. He said, "That's all you need." And he's right. He goes, the twist beat, well, at that time I was like, and the swing beat, ding, 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 ding. But basically it was rock and shuffle,
Right.
and you can play the whole Beatle album with those 2 beats. So when I put the Beatle, and I had like one of those, they call them a Victrola, like right in back of me where the drums are set up over here, and I, put the needle down and start playing. And I think that's when it really happened,
Oh my
And
God.
then I remember that first Christmas I asked for a floor tom because, it was a 3-piece kit. I needed a floor tom because Wipeout was lame without a floor tom, right? And that was the standard, So yeah, I mean, that was the moment, when you started playing to the Beatles records, and you learn how to play Wipeout, and then the next step was getting a couple of kids in the neighborhood together and playing,
Nice.
So that was really exciting times.
Red Sparkle, by the way, was my first kit. Jason Gianni and I talked about this last week. I had a red sparkle Ludwig kit. So 24, 14, 18, huge. I mean, I was tiny, and the rack tom was a 14, and the floor tom was an 18, with a Slingerland chrome snare drum, no hi-hat, which I made.
Oh, like Keith Moon.
Yeah. I took a cymbal and I clamped a washcloth with a C clamp to the cymbal so it would mute it a little so I could make it sound like a hi-hat. And that was my start. And that red sparkle kit stayed with me for many, many years. And then I gave it to a student. So I kind of passed it on. But that kit, is it gone? Like long gone? Or yeah?
I wish I had it, but I sold it, and I had a gig on an ice cream truck, and I saved all my money, and I was really, really had a hard time deciding if I wanted to go with Ringo Oyster Pearl or Champagne Sparkle Dino.
Nice.
It was really a toss-up. I almost went with the Champagne Dino, but then Clive Bunker from Tull, he had a Oyster Pearl kit, so it was kind of like, we're still popular with the second British invasion, which I consider, Procol Harum, Traffic, all those bands, and I saw Clive Bunker with an Oyster Pearl, and I got this kit. Actually, then I doubled it with a double bass, and I sold half the kit.
Oh, okay.
But so this is still my '67 Ludwig kit that I bought in '67.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
Yeah. So I didn't have the first kit that my uncle handed down, but my second kit is there.
That's still incredible that you have it. Yeah. Man, I did the same thing because I got that Ludwig Red Sparkle kit, and then I got a second bass drum, a couple more toms, and I built like a big kit out of it that I used playing like the L'Amour scene in the metal scene in the 80s. And then I sold half the kit at some point and kept the older half, because the ones that I replaced that I added on were like olive badge later Ludwig ones.
Later, yeah.
So I sold half the kit.
These are the no, they're not the WFL.
Those Keystone badge.
Yeah. Ludwig. It's the '67 Keystone badge. Yeah.
Oh, nice. So you start playing with kids in the neighborhood. So you were following that track of like just getting together with guys and playing, which we had a similar thing, I think. Like really not much happened with the school band thing until much later, where I was starting bands with kids in the neighborhood. So when was like your first gig with playing with the kids?
My first gig was, it was, I think, a Sea Cadet meeting, and we had a singer, 2 guitar players, no bass player. I don't know how that happened. And we did, I think, 2 gigs. I don't remember where the second one was, but I have a picture somewhere of the first gig. It was hilarious.
Wow.
And then my uncle saw that I was really getting into this, and he had more free time. My dad was working his butt off, but my uncle was around. He was only about 10 years older than I, so he was like a big brother. And he saw what was going on. He said, I'm going to take you for some drum lessons, And so I went for drum lessons at this place in Jamaica, Queens. And it was called Al Peterson's Music Studio.
What was the teacher's name?
And they were looking for a drummer. These 2 guitar players, my age, were looking for a drummer. And they introduced me to the 2 guitar players. One of those guitar players happened to be Lenny Kutke, the bass player from the Good Rats.
Wow.
That's how I met Lenny, and I had a band. And so I joined his band with these 2 guitar players. They had a bass player as well. And we were called the Cliffhangers. And then we played all the high schools, the Battle of the Bands, those days. Before you were playing bars,
right.
We played,
Dances.
High schools. Battle of the Bands. Oh,
yeah.
Those were great days because, I'm talking, we're kids. We're 14, 15 years old. So, those are the beginnings.
Oh, man. So
before bar bands.
Right. And what age was that about at that time?
Well, it was like, started at 13. but I stayed with them through high school. There were different variations. Some people came and went, and that was the group, my unit that I lived at the Fillmore East with, and we saw all those bands. We and Hendrix and Cream, and everyone who played the Fillmore, from Pink Floyd to Jethro Tull, the Procol Harum, Traffic, multiple times.
Oh my God.
And that's how we grew up. That was my high school. High school for me was the '60s, mid to late '60s,
Right.
and Brooklyn Tech. We spoke about
Yeah.
Brooklyn, and yeah, that's what we did. I didn't play in marching bands. I
Right.
didn't play, never played in drum corps, um, and part of me regrets it because I've been a real pad nerd lately. But I always had this band where the Cliffhangers morphed into a couple of different names, but that was the unit that I went through high school with, and those are such formative years.
Yeah.
And yeah.
So not doing the marching band thing, basically playing in bands, there's,
Yeah.
like you said, I was in a marching thing for a minute. Like they wanted percussion players and I didn't want to do mallets. I just wanted to play snare drum, so I didn't stay that long. But playing in bands, I think there's an advantage there, just that you get into playing drum set kind of only, from a young age. So, it's kind of the trade-off, right? It's like,
No, yeah, it would be good to have both.
yeah,
I never really had formal hand lessons when I was a kid. And I played by ear, and I basically listened to records and, cop the stuff that was going on.
yeah,
But yeah, I think it's kind of cooler to play in a band. And plus the Brooklyn Tech marching band, we had to play in some really rough neighborhoods in Brooklyn, and it's kind of not what I wanted to do on my Saturday.
right, right. I mean, I have to say, like, I always encourage students to do it all. Do as much as
Yeah.
you can do. Play marching band, playing jazz band, playing concert band, playing orchestra if they have it. Do it all. Play drum set, play in band, but get with people in a room, no matter what, and start a band, because for me, that's where it all came together. Like you said, it was always at the drummer's house. It was in my mom's basement in Brooklyn. We had the PA system there, or whatever amps were there. And, so the advantage was everybody was coming to your house. You just went down there and played drums all day. Mom would bake some cookies and we'd go upstairs and like munch and then go back down and rehearse. It was great. Those are the great days, right?
Yep, happy days.
Yeah, exactly. So so you met your bass player from the Good Rats in that sort of first incarnation of that band
Yeah.
and then so you guys stayed in touch, for years, and then how did that start to come together with the Good Rats?
Well, I think we stayed together until the early '70s, and then we kind of branched out and went different ways. I played in a band that had a record out on Polydor in '72 called Haystacks Balboa. And I'm trying to think of the connect. Well, I'll tell you the exact connection of how the Good Rat thing happened. I was playing with Lenny, and we had a great guitar player, this guy Mike. And I left that band to play in this band, Haystacks. And I was taking lessons from Carmine. Carmine was kind of like a neighbor. He lived close to where I was living. And I'd go over his house, play, and then he went on the road with Beck Bogert and Appice. This was in the Cactus days. When that split up,
Yeah.
he went on the road with Beck Bogert and Appice, and he had his best student take over his teaching while he was on the road.
Nice.
His best student his name was Joe Markowski. Brilliant, technician. He got my hands together. And he asked me, he says, I've just met these two brothers, the two Marcello brothers, and we need a bass player and a guitar player because I want to put a band together with these two brothers. They're amazing. And they sought me out. They went to Al Miller, who was a drum teacher on Long Island. They asked for his best student. Al gave the Marcello brothers Joe Morkowski, and now Joe and the Marcello brothers are looking for lead guitar player and bass player. I said, I just left a great bass player, great lead guitar player. So they go and join this band with the Marcello brothers, which is the Good Rats. And about a month or two later, Lenny calls me and he goes, Joe, thanks, man. These brothers are great, great songs, had a production deal at Ultrasonic in Hempstead. They could record whenever they wanted to, but we need you to play drums. It's very weird. I said, but that's my drum teacher.
Right.
No, but we need you to play drums. So long story short, I wound up replacing him and joined the Good Rats.
Crazy.
And the main reason I joined them, they had amazing songs, but they had a production deal. I didn't have any recording experience.
Yeah.
And that, together with the great songs and my old mates, it was a no-brainer, you know. So I joined the Good Rats. It was at the end of '72. Yeah.
Wow.
And we rehearsed for about maybe 6 weeks, and we played for 10 years.
Wow.
Nonstop.
That's
From
insane.
72 to 82, I'd say average 5 days a week, you know.
Oh
I mean,
God.
it was insane. Yeah.
So
You can't do that today, you know.
yeah.
But
And
there was so many clubs back then in the 70s, you know. Great scene.
I mean, first of all, the production deal thing, I mean, that's kind of a thing of the past. And it's like, so, you know, having a production deal.
No, you do get studios that do that. They'll develop an artist, you know. I mean, they'll make sure they have all their paperwork together and protected beforehand. But, you know, it kind of makes sense if you have this facility and there's nobody in this week, well, why don't we develop an act and, you know, we'll sign them on to management. So it kind of happened. I think Queen had a production deal at Trident. And that's why their record sounded so amazing. They're using one of the best studios, and they got their studio chops together really early in their day. But yeah, having a production deal, and every time our singer Pepe Marcello, every time he'd write a song, we went in and recorded it. You know, so that was really valuable experience for me. And yeah.
Pepe was great. Rest in peace, Pepe. But man. So what a great unit. And then, so you go from kind of like playing local clubs, and then when did like the touring really start for you guys?
Well, we started blowing up locally, and the local station started playing our demos. And that's what led to a Warner Brothers deal.
Right.
And all of a sudden we have a label deal, which is perfect timing for me because I graduated college in '73 and went right into a full-time band, you know.
Nice.
So it was perfect. I had nothing to tie me down and joined the Good Rats at the perfect time of my life, you know. I was like 17 years old and all of a sudden I had a record deal on Warner Brothers making my first record.
Yeah.
You know.
Oh, man.
Yeah. So that happened. And, you know, Good Rats, we would tour when a new record came out, but then we would just for 8 or 9 months a year just be playing the club scene. It was big, it was lucrative. You can play one night in Poughkeepsie, the next night in Asbury Park, you know, the next night in Philly. It would be, you know, the tri-state area was so huge.
Yeah.
And we would drive 2 hours to a gig and come home and sleep in your own bed. It was a really weird scene. I mean, yeah, sometimes we'd take a hotel, but I'm just saying, for the most part, we basically had that big of a circle of clubs where you never got played out. You could play a club maybe only 4 times a year.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, you have enough places in the area that you can keep changing it up. Yeah. Wow, that's amazing. And so did you guys get any early on any chances to open for any really big acts that were maybe your heroes or?
Oh yeah, I mean, you know, we were so big in the Northeast that bands used to put us on the bill to sell a couple of thousand seats, you know, and, you know, I'm talking like Rush and Cheap Trick and Journey and The Heart and Styx and, you know, it goes on and on. They play in the Northeast, so we're going to put these guys on the bill because it'll help us sell out.
Yep.
So that was, you know, it's funny, like we were work the reverse of how most bands work. We were huge in the Northeast, And that was the last place that all the Midwest bands broke, because you had to have a hit single to be big in New York. And we were big in New York because we lived here and we just played this club circuit for years and developed this following, and all the local stations played us on the air, So it was a unique situation.
It reminds me, I mean, they didn't quite have the success, but like Alive and Kicking story, kind of like when they were coming up, they had that one hit, the radio hit, the band Alive and Kicking, and they had sort of a following, but then it kind of fizzled, and they were doing cover gigs around Brooklyn, when I was in high school, They also had a Peppy in the band. That guy Peppy from Live and Kicking could basically sing females or males or whatever, like any kind of voice you morph. So what was like one of the first larger venues that you got to play, and what was that like coming from like the club scene?
Well, we started playing theaters,
right?
First we would open theaters. We opened theaters in the Midwest with Journey. Even big clubs, the Agora in Cleveland, we played with them, the Tomorrow Theater, in the Midwest and here as well. After a certain amount of time, they take these old movie theaters and they would rip out the seats in the front, and keep the balcony. And so it was just like, standing in the front, and then people wanted to sit can go back in the balcony and seat and sit. And there were a bunch of those in the Midwest. So we played a bunch of them. And then we gravitated to playing big places with like Rush. And I think we did a couple with Journey, the Dome Arena, Rochester. Rush, we did all Coliseums in the Northeast.
Nice.
78, the Hemispheres tour.
Oh, wow.
And that was great. Neil was great. We played on each other's kit, the first sound check. I mean,
Nice.
he was a sweetheart, and but yeah, it just evolved into that. And then by 1980, that's when they changed the drinking age from 18, which really meant 16. If you're 16, you got
Right.
in the club, to 21, and they were strict.
Yeah.
So that killed the scene.
Crazy, right?
That's when I split. I after a year or so of that, I joined a Canadian band called Chilliwack, and we did a big arena tour of Canada, all the hockey stadiums up there, and that was great. It was a really fun thing. And so, my chronology, when I got back from that, was the first time I wasn't playing steady in over 10 years. And that's when I decided to write the double bass drumming book.
Okay, so
82, 40 years ago is when I started writing it.
and that spawned clinic stuff, clinic tours, right?
Yeah, well, the book led to the clinic tours. I never did a drum clinic until the drum book came out. Well,
Right.
I think I did a couple for Long Island Drum Center because the Good Reps were so popular. So I did do a couple. And in fact, they had a publication company, Jerry and Dom, called DC Publications.
Right.
And that's what planted the seed. Like, you write a book, you have a home for it. And so that was the motivation. I knew that if I did this, it would actually be released. So, that first year that I didn't have a steady gig, I would teach every Monday and Tuesday at two of the drum centers out there, one in Comac and one in Merrick or Belmore, one of them. And I would try out all these ideas on my students, and it was really great. Really, it was a great experience.
Writing the book,
Gratifying.
Yeah. And I would guess possibly with writing the book, it's sort of your teaching ideas just coming to fruition on paper, right? It's like sort of writing something that you can use for yourself, and then it just makes sense to turn that into a book, right? So
totally, yeah.
Much, it was much the same way for me. I actually wrote, it's kind of funny, I would love to show it to you sometime, but I wrote like a double bass book later on, but it was specifically for people to develop their weaker side. So it was like a weaker side foot book kind of thing. So it was actually, there was no left and right in there. It said weaker side, leading foot, weaker foot. So it was just like a development book. But your book is the one that made me really have a system to work on my double bass stuff. Because I was playing metal in high school. I was playing the Lemoore scene and all that stuff. And so this book really helped me get my shit together. So I thank you for making this.
Well, thank you, Jim.
And I think it's still, when you mention double bass playing to most musicians that I know, this book always comes up. And so when I wrote my chapter in my book on double bass fills, in my intro, I said, make sure that you check out Joe Franco's book, Double Bass Drumming, first, before you go to do all the drum fills. Work on your grooves from that book, because this was just laid out so smartly and so well. So anyway,
Thank you.
And the video, is such a great video. And it's funny because as a kid, I had this sort of, I don't know if it was just because I thought you guys sort of had a similar look on stage, but like Rod Morgenstein and you were the two guys that I was looking to for like double bass and playing, big drum kits and playing big sounding rock. And so, you and Rod were sort of like my heroes as a teen,
We did a lot of clinics together because at the time we were both playing for Premier. We were both
Right.
endorsed by Premier Drums, and we did a bunch of clinics together. We had a great time.
Yeah. And he's a southpaw. I'm a southpaw. So that was the one thing, that he had over everybody else's. He was one of the lefties that I could look at and go like, yeah, he plays like I do. But yeah, awesome. And by the way, when I opened with that track at the top of the show from the Good Rats, which is kind of a play on a standard, right?
Gershwin.
Yeah. So Rat City in Blue instead of Rhapsody in Blue, which is great. But that's a cool double bass shuffle. And so was there inspiration from some of the earlier, because there wasn't too many before that, right? Billy Cobham.
Yeah. No, it was before Cobb. Well, no, it was after Cobham. The inspiration came from Carmine.
Yeah.
Cactus.
Yeah.
Carmine was playing a double bass shuffle in the later days of the Fudge. And then on the first Cactus album, first song, first side, Parchment Farm,
Yep.
double bass shuffle, super fast boogie. And what they were trying to do is, this was like right after Woodstock, right? And what was the biggest boogie song in Woodstock? Going Home 10 years after.
Right.
And so they were trying to cop that groove, but Carmine threw the double bass thing in, and that was their version of doing a bluesy, really up-tempo boogie. That's how I started playing double bass shuffles. Yeah.
Gotcha.
But I was doing like some jazz rise, and like back then I was studying out of the Chapin book. I was developing a bunch of things at once. So besides developing double bass, I was developing independence and developing different rides. And so I tried to, like when you're a kid and you just want to throw everything into one song.
Yeah.
That's kind of what happened there.
Yeah, and the swing feel, I mean, that makes sense now, like thinking of the Chapin book as being, part of your early studies, right? Which, by the way, I make all my students still do that Chapin book. It's one of the greatest books still.
Well, the three biggies in the early 70s when I was studying were, syncopation, stick control, and Chapin. And
man.
They were the three biggies.
And they're still staples. I mean, there's a million books out now, but I will still always have those in the repertoire, including this lately.
Ben, that was like COVID.
Yeah.
That book was like COVID, those displacements kicked my ass. I mean, right. I can play a flam paradiddle. Okay, well then try playing it here. And then you're on the E, and then you're on the N, and then you're on the
Yeah.
I loved it.
And make it feel as good as,
feel good
on the downbeat. Right. Oh, that's great, man. We should check into the chat real quick and just say hello to some people. Let me just pull up the chat. So, and I'll pull up the chat window so they can see themselves over there. There we go. First one in, Sergio Bellotti. How are you doing, Sergio? He goes, Toscano and Franco, good evening. Respect and love to you both. Do you know Sergio?
What's his last name?
Bellotti. He's a great lefty drummer. Good friend of mine, Southpaw. He teaches at Berkeley.
Oh, wow.
Great drummer. Sweetheart of a guy too. He was on the show a while back, but great guy.
I'll have to look him up.
Yeah. Sergio. Anthony Casina. Greetings to the drum community. Lindsey McDonald, what's up, buddy? How you doing, man? Joe Elliott, my good buddy from my childhood, who we studied with the same drum teacher when we were kids. We studied with handsome Hal Parker from Brooklyn, like a Jewish guy with a big afro, sort of long-haired afro. He was tan all year round, and he wore a long leather coat. He looked like a rock star, and but he was a club day drummer, and he played like in the Catskills scene and all that stuff. Great guy. And just a real quick funny story, kind of comes full circle. I'm like 17, driving my car with my drums. I'm in a tuxedo, and I look next to me on the Brooklyn Bridge, and it's my drum teacher in his car with his drums in his tuxedo, and we're side by side on the road. But yeah, so a little nod to handsome Hal Parker. And then Barry Nagel hanging with us. He said Rat City in Blue. Yeah, very, very good. My buddy Vincent LaRusse is saying that one of his first drum books that he ever worked on was double bass drumming. So sweet. That's a hard book to start with, Vincent. But yeah, great book. Joey Pinto hanging with us from Staten Island. Ray Levere hanging with us from upstate New York. Do you know Ray? Ray Levere.
That sounds familiar.
Yeah, he's a great drummer.
Yeah.
He was on the show not that long ago. Ray's a great guy hanging with us. Anthony has a question. Hey, Joe, back in the 70s with the Good Rats, what were some of the game-changing moments? We might have touched on that a little, but yeah, what were some of the game-changing moments?
Well, making your first record, that was always huge. And then hearing it played on the radio, back in those days, WNEW was a big New York station. And Allison Steele playing Injun Joe one night, I was like, oh my God, and Dennis Els's, Vince Skelsa. Vince Skelsa loved the Good Rats. He loved the Good Rats. He would always play us. And that's as good as it gets, to listen to the radio that you grew up with playing your music. That was a real high. Yeah.
What do you remember the first time you put the radio on and it was you on the radio?
Yeah. Dennis Els's played Back to My Music. First side of the Tasty record. And I was like, wow, this is really happening.
That's amazing. John Gill saying hello from Oneonta, New York. He says, hey, Jim and Joe, from a former Long Islander. Joe, do you keep in contact with any of your Good Rats bandmates?
Yeah, absolutely. The ones that are still living, of course. I do keep in touch with them. And if I don't hear from them in a while, I'll ring them up or, I'll get a text from them and we'll do a little exchange. And of course, Lenny's been my good friend for how many years? Since we were 12. I hate to say how many years that is.
Yeah. Yeah. Joey Pinto, Joe Elliott, Jason Gianni hanging with us tonight. Hey Jason. Very cool. He was a great guest last week. We had such a blast.
Great drummer.
Yeah, he's a great player. Super funny guy too. We had a great hang. We went to the diner. Nothing finer than going to the diner. And then we hung in here and talked drums. My sister's hanging with us, Patricia. Thanks for coming in, Trish, my sister. Sandy from Manila. What? Wait, let me put my glasses on so I can read. Sandy Balyong from Manila hanging with us. Let's see. Jason and Anthony having their own conversation. Nick Capoulos hanging with us. What's up, Nick? How you doing, man? Nick Capoulos, another Long Island guy. I still consider you a Brooklyn guy, though, Joe, because you were born in Brooklyn.
I consider myself. It's, you can tell by the accent.
yeah, exactly. By the way, do you see Carmine in Florida when you're there?
Oh, big time. We just had dinner a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
I was down there for it. Yeah.
So
we're close. We're about like 20 minutes away from each other,
Yeah, you're in that area right where Derek Roddy is and Nico and Carmine. That's amazing. Let's see. Bob Sears from New Hampshire hanging with us. Peter Retzlaff, great drummer from originally from Ohio, but he's a New York guy. He lives in Brooklyn. Peter Retzlaff
Hey, Peter.
also. Do you know Peter?
I'm Facebook friends with him. I don't know if we met, but yeah, I
Um,
know who he is.
Baby Steps to Giant Steps is his book. It's a jazz independence book with great play-alongs, and he was a staff educator at Drummers Collective. So Peter hanging with us. Joe Elliott.
That's who I know him from. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, Joe Elliott saying, don't forget that Hal, our drum teacher, smoked those cheap Optimo cigars. He would smoke cigars like during the drum lesson and blow the smoke at you while you were playing. Like he would literally sit 3 inches from my floor tom and blow the cigar smoke in my face. Yeah.
Pleasant.
Thank
Hold
you.
on, I lost my
Yeah,
earphone.
there were other unpleasantries I won't mention. Dave Clive from
Well, no, I remember my first drum teacher. He would smoke. He was smoking cigarettes, like like in this little room, just smoking, chain smoking. Yeah,
putting them out on your drums. Oh, those are probably his drums. Dave Clive from Dave Clive's Gretchen Museum. He says he has an autographed copy of your double bass book from 1993, and he still uses the book today with his students. And he has a rubber rat from a Good Rat show at my father's place on Long Island. Wow.
93. That's probably from a Widowmaker gig.
Oh yeah. Wow,
Yeah,
you might maybe you autographed it at that gig.
probably.
Cool, man. By the way, I wanted to mention Taylor Dane. So like the reason I wanted to mention that is because first of all, when I was a kid, I was friendly with people in that circle for some reason. And somebody was like, "Oh man, Taylor would love you. She would love your playing and she would love you." And then my buddy told me that you were recording her record. And I was like, "Oh man," I go, "that lucky bastard." I was like, because, I knew you as a rock drummer and a double bass drummer. And like, I was like, man, that's so smart that you were, venturing into that. And then I kind of came to know that you were, programming and smartly following in where the dance stuff was going, because that's where the music industry was going and that's where the work was coming. So did your studio come before those kind of gigs, or did that happen after?
Yeah, it happened after. Basically what programming does is it introduces you to the other side of the glass
Yeah.
where all the knobs and buttons and things are, and you're not the guy on the recording room side, where you're playing the drums, you finish a take and you're turning around to see if anyone's laughing. You're kind of communicating with the producer, with the engineers, and that's what kind of intrigued me about gear, and that's what led me to put a home studio together, and that's what from there it went to Beat Street. Basically, I opened Beat Street when the gear was in my New York City loft, and that space became baby's room
Right.
eventually. And so I had to move my gear out to a commercial space, and that's how my studio started in '95.
Ah, got you. So 95. Okay. So the home studio thing, let me ask you. So was it originally when you first started doing that, was it like the Tascam cassette 8-track thing or 4-track recorders in the early days? Did you toy with all that early recording gear, or you kind of
No,
skipped over
I
that?
had a 3340. I had a TX 3340. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, no, it was basically the time that DA88s and ADATs came out, that
Right.
technology came out. And the very first Pro Tools, which was really a 2-track editor called, I don't even remember, Sound Designer. I know, I forgot what they called it. But then it gravitated to a 4-track recording system.
Right.
And then Opcode came out with a sequencer called Studio Vision, and you were able to use that 4-track DigiDesign before they called it Avid,
Right.
and that was like a godsend because I would do electronic drums and then I have a guitar player over and I could do vocals and I could and you could really put music together on that rig. And then it just I just saw that that's where it was going, and I got into Pro Tools way early on,
Yeah.
And you know, my studio was based on Pro Tools.
Wow. So as far as the programming thing, I mean, I've spoken with other drummers too who like Omar Hakim who basically said like, yeah, you go with what's in front of you. Like I think you told a story where they were using your drums on part of a record and then they were going to bring in a programmer. So you were like,
Exactly.
wait a minute, I'm missing the boat on this. It's like
That's
I should
exactly
be programming.
exactly what happened. 1986, I was doing Fiona's second record. Bo Hill was producing. I did 6 songs, and then he was going to call on a programmer to do the other 4 because he wanted those programmed. I mean, he was very slick, Bo.
Yeah.
And I was like, huh? And meanwhile, I wasn't really intimidated by computers. I had a degree in computer science from CCNY,
Oh wow.
put that in a drawer and rocked out. And then all of a sudden, when computers came into the picture in the mid 80s, I was like, all right, I'm not intimidated by this, you know.
Yeah.
But I hated the Lindrum. You know, it was when SP12 came out where you can put your own sounds in the machine and then samplers after that. And you know, when it became personal, you can actually put your material into the machine and play your sounds and crossfade things so they have life to them and don't sound like the same sound every time. That's when it became interesting, and I was big into that for a few years. Yeah.
Nice. So you were sampling your own drum sounds. So did you?
Oh yeah.
You must have created quite a catalog of sound, right?
I still have the DAT tapes. I had the
I was
DAT
going to
tapes with
ask.
notebooks where there was like say 80 hits of a hi hat, like taps, left hand taps, it's a little heavier taps, side stick tap, slightly open, and then you crossfade them, and I could play a drum cat and make it feel like a hi hat.
Oh my
You
god.
know, with a Lindrum, you had like that same hi hat sample. It was so lame, and every hi hat sounded the same.
Yeah,
Every
exactly.
side stick sounded the same, except for Prince's. He tuned it down 2 octaves.
Right.
But you know, you could get so creative with that machine, and then it became, oh yeah, Cylindrum
Oh man.
or the DMX. You know, the Oberheim version. You know,
When I was a kid, I
but
mean,
anyway,
the big thing because and I had been familiar with those drum machines, but the big ones for me were like Alesis came out with like a HR-16 or something. There was like an Alesis one, and there was another one before that I had. And I had Simmons pads, and I had a early Octapad, and I had some those hotspot triggers, and I made like sort of trigger surfaces that that were like people's faces, and was really playing around with the electronics, trying to
yeah.
go with this. The Simmons came because I was watching Bill Bruford play like the King Crimson stuff on those whatever shaped 6-sided shaped Simmons pads. So I had a set of those, but I was trying to just roll with what was happening in the music industry with that stuff. And I kind of had a love affair with electronic drums for a bunch of years. And now, I do have sample pads, but I really don't. I got rid of most of that stuff. But do you find yourself still going to them for certain productions or at all?
Once I opened Beat Street, I got rid of all that stuff,
Yeah.
and it was just like I have my drums. I don't program. I
Nice.
you know I It just the way it worked out for me. By that time in the mid '90s, it wasn't as challenging as it was in the early days when you had to create your own sound.
Right.
Everyone had sample libraries and now virtual instruments and all that stuff. I did get into one thing. If you want to talk tech, I did get into the Spectrasonics. What was it called? Stylus. Um, where you can create these loops and then you can track these loops to the drums. So instead of the drummer playing to the loop played to the drummer.
Right.
I love that. And I use that a lot in Steve. I did a record with Steve Walsh called Shadowman.
Yeah.
That stuff is all over that record.
Oh, crap.
Yeah, really a cool record where I was able to explore. It was all live drums, but all the background stuff, he just let me do my thing, and I did all these drum loops that were triggered by the drums as opposed to the other way around. It was a really fun record to make.
Wow. Oh,
But
that's so cool.
yeah,
Um, yeah, I think another like little interesting piece of technology, like in the early Pro Tools stuff, was when I discovered like Beat Detective, and you could take sort of like the groove, sort of the template of the groove, and apply it to another track. And so
I got you. Yeah.
It's kind of interesting where that stuff started pretty early on. I mean, now where everything
Yeah,
is,
but
it's like,
I find that too many people use that as, let's be perfect and let's,
yeah,
put everything on the grid. I mean, I hear stuff on the radio where the fills sound like they're quantized. I mean, it's it's
I
it's
know.
horrible what people are doing to the real feel. And I've spoken, I'm not going to mention names, but like a lot of session drummers, it's really pissed off,
Yeah,
because they play the track and they got paid to play the track, and then they had creative license to do what they're going to do. It's all in Pro Tools, and they start stiffening things up, and it doesn't even sound like the drummer anymore.
yeah, and I
So
know some guys too
I'm
that I've spoken to have said that they basically put it in a contract that like you can't, I mean, there's different philosophies of this, but like you don't want to be credited if it doesn't have your feel and it doesn't sound like you.
totally.
So where they'll put it on paper that, listen, I'll do your track, but if you don't edit this, you don't quantize this, you don't put it on the grid, you don't sound replace everything,
Yeah,
and it's sort of
as somebody who's kind of like most of the records I've done since I had Beat Street together, I mean, I use Pro Tools for the fact that I can do a punch in. I mean, remember
yeah,
the old days of 2-inch tape? It's like, oh, I love that take, but there's this one part that I want to do over. Well, you could
right,
do it over, but you could screw up the whole track, and you have to count on that engineer getting in and out. I
yeah,
love Pro Tools for that. But like, what do you have to quantize something? What do you just play it again? Play
right,
play it until you like the way it feels. Like I am really against that.
yeah, man,
I grew up with 2-inch tape, and almost all my early records were done well until the late '80s.
yeah.
They were all done on 2-inch tape.
So where the studio's at now, where your business is, you guys do a lot of voiceover work. You're still doing work for television?
We
Um,
do all things audio. I
yeah,
mean, it's funny, but you know what the biggest things are in audio right now? Things that you could put in here.
right.
Like podcasts and audiobooks.
Yeah,
We do that. But I mean, on the higher end, we do feature film work.
right.
And we all but our bread and butter is mixing for television, and more specifically, we got into children's television, and
Right.
we developed this niche with Nickelodeon, Nine Story, Sesame Workshop. They're all my friends. So it
Wow.
never really feels like work. It just feels like your friends come over and you watch cartoons.
You have that in common with Jason Gianni. He did the original SpongeBob SquarePants theme song for
There you go.
Nickelodeon. That's so funny, man. And also where your business has gone, hence the new Foley room and the reason why your big DW kit is right behind you, right?
Yeah, right where I like it.
Yeah, exactly. Let me read these couple of comments. These last few things. I know we're coming up on the hour. Billy Worst saying that his teacher used to smoke during his lesson in his bedroom. That's not nice. Nick Kapoulos says Joe blew my mind at Long Island Drum Center clinic, probably in the late 70s. He was doing this monster fill, and all of a sudden he would go into this buzz roll for like a minute that totally blew my mind. John Gatto comes to our Rain Brain gigs all the time. He's great people. There you go. Nice. Dan Falcone says, hi, Joe, you're a great player. Saw the Good Rats open for the Pat Travers Band in 1980 at the Palladium in New York
Palladium.
City.
I remember
Wow.
that gig. Michael Shreve went out and played a song with Pat that night. Um, and I even remember D.L. Byron opening before we got on, and then Pat Travers. And Tommy Price was playing with D.L. Byron that night. And the first time I saw Tommy play, and Tommy's one of my favorite rock drummers. Yeah, and he's from Staten Island, I think.
Wow. Well, he says, question for you. Are you familiar with the drummer Joe Novello?
Yes,
Navolo, sorry. Joe Navolo, who
when I
teaches in.
left Good Rats, he wound up playing in Good Rats for a while.
Okay, yeah, yeah. So he teaches in Neptune, New Jersey at Big Beat Drum Studio.
Yeah, he had. I think that's his place. I think he started that whole Big B drum studios. Yeah,
And
phenomenal drummer.
yeah, and he wanted to know what you thought. Yeah, what you thought of his drumming. So very cool.
Oh,
Um,
Joe's amazing.
Rick Latham hanging with us. Rick, what's up?
Hey, Rick. Oh man, Rick's first book came out right around the same time, early '80s, and we'd always hang at PAS shows and drum clinic kind of stuff. And hey, Rick, good to hear from you.
Rick's a great guy.
He's down in Texas, right? I think, pretty
He's
sure.
in South Carolina now. Back to his roots.
Okay. Okay.
Nick Capoulos wants to know if you recorded Fiona's first album.
Yeah.
Yep.
I recorded the first, second, and third.
Nice. Anthony, Aunt C, who's from Drummers Collective, New
We
York
know
City.
MC.
What's up?
He's going to say, hey, Joe, when we doing some fresh mozzarella?
That's exactly what he wrote. He wrote, "Love you, buddy. How about we get some fresh mozzarella from downstairs?"
Do I know this guy?
Which, by the way, your nickname was Brajol. Like, who gave you that, by the way?
That was a good rat thing.
Oh, it's a good rats thing?
Yeah.
Nice.
It was like one of those Brooklyn Italian things where everyone had like a Godfather name, That
Nice.
was Joe Brajol.
That's great. Michael Rosilio saying, "I'm watching, Joe."
Mike,
What's up?
Mike is one of my best buds. I've known him forever.
Awesome.
We saw each other at Carmine's 75th birthday party down in Florida about last December.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, thanks for hanging, Michael. We appreciate that. Stacy Keenan hanging with us. Always good to have you, Stacy. Al Henneborn hanging. Followed the Good Rats all through Suffolk County, I think is what he wrote. Followed the Good Rats at all the Suffolk County venues, I guess. Bobby Pavone, did you ever play or record with Dino Danelli?
No, and Dino played my high school. He played Brooklyn Tech with the Rascals, 67. And the only time I ever met Dino was at the cutting room, only about maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And I went up to him. I said, Dino, man, I didn't want to introduce myself or talk about any of my achievement. I just said, you're probably so tired of drummers coming up to you and telling you how much you meant to them. And he goes, you know what? I never get tired of that.
That's awesome.
It was cool.
See, that's because the drum community is tight, man. It's like,
Yeah.
when it's coming from drummers, a buddy of mine was saying he was a fan of, a buddy of mine who's in here is a Kiss fan. And so he went to like a Peter Criss event, right? And everybody online is asking Peter like questions about Kiss and about touring and about the fallouts and all that stuff. And my buddy asked him specific questions about tracks that he played on. And he just lit up and the line stopped and they talked for a long time. And his wife, who's his manager, is trying to move the line along. And he was like, no, we're talking drums. So it's like, once you get drummers talking drums, it's all over.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's like, the first time I met Tommy Lee, Mr. Rockstar and this or that, we start talking about kick drum sounds and stuff like that. I mean, he didn't want to talk to anybody else at the party. He just wanted to, So did it have enough click? Did it have the big bottom? He wanted me to describe what the bass drum sounded like that night. I had seen him at the Garden.
Oh, wow.
Pretty funny.
That's crazy. Well, I call these speed round questions. We're going to go real quick because I know we're pressed for time. I'm just going to give you a couple real fast. And I already asked you some of these, but I wanted to ask you, what is one artist that you never played with that you would like to play with or wish you had if they're already gone?
Eddie Van Halen, but I think that position was covered,
Yeah,
of course,
sure.
I could go back and say Jimmy, but Mitch was so perfect for Jimmy. Mitch and Jimmy were like Elvin and Coltrane,
Yeah.
There was just some magic there, There's no way I could do any justice playing with Jimmy, because Mitch was like the perfect Jimmy drummer, in my opinion,
Right.
But yeah, I would say Eddie.
Nice. What is one record that you listen to that might surprise the audience?
Love forever changes.
Wow.
Might surprise you.
That might surprise me.
It's funny. I just saw rekindled my memory of that record. I just saw a podcast with the original lead guitar player in the band, and who's still alive, and it was done by Rick Rubin. It was a great interview, and
Nice.
it just totally reminded me of how that was one of my favorite records of all time. And you wouldn't think it. It was
Right.
not a drum record.
Right. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think, that's the thing. Like, we're not always listening to records that are drum centric,
No,
so to speak. I
no, not
love
at all.
there's a lot of things like I love Lyle Lovett. I mean, there's always great drumming on it, but I love listening to stories and Lyle's like
Yeah.
acoustic stuff.
Oh God, I can listen to Cat Stevens all day. I mean, I love a lot of things. Well, actually, he had some great drum tracks.
Yeah.
But I mean, yeah, I mean, it's not all about drums. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Worst or weirdest gig you ever had?
Oh, I can't talk about it. Let me think of the second worst. Okay, here we go. I grew up in New York City. Okay, so I went to the Schaefer Festival. It became Miller Festival. It was at the Woolman Rink, Central Park. Um, and I'd go see Buddy Rich every year there for $1. And then it
Wow.
became $2. And I loved going to these concerts and always dreamed of playing there. Okay. So finally, I'm in the Good Rats and we get asked to play on the bill with Dickie Betts and Great Southern. And there's a buzz on the radio that the Allman Brothers are going to reunite. So they had all their fans out there. I mean, nobody wanted to hear about an opening act, and
Yeah.
we were the opening act. Okay, so but we had hardcore fans, so we had a lot of people there loving us. But we had all these guys, and Good Rats. If you never saw them, were pretty irreverent. So we used to throw out rubber rats, and then they started flying back at us.
Oh no.
Okay, and then Mickey said, "Hey, pretty good arm there, cowboy." Because there's a bunch of cowboy hats out there. It started a war.
Oh
It
my
was like
God.
our fans against the cowboy hats, and not that I have anything against cowboy hats, but this is what went down that night, and that was one of the weirdest gigs. I remember walking off stage and Dickie Betts saying, "What the hell's going on out there?"
Oh, that's great. That's a good story. Oh man. All right, I got
Uh,
two more. One is what is the first record you ever bought with your own money, if you can remember?
I do. It
Most
was
people remember.
probably either Elvis or Four Seasons. Let me see. The Elvis would have been Return to Sender. Return to Sender.
Yeah, I had that.
Four Seasons would be. It wasn't Sherry. I bought their second single, "Big Girls Don't Cry." You know,
Wow.
and Chubby Checker. Let's Twist Again. And that was early '60s. That's when I was a kid, 10 years old, and buying 45s.
Wow. It's just speaking about Return to Sender. My parents had like a best of Elvis record or something.
Yeah.
And I always loved that when I was a little kid. It was really like the first sort of rock and swing thing that I had heard.
Shuffle. Yeah.
And I was like, wow, that shuffle stuck in my head for a long time from that song. And also the bass was really present, like walking bass line on it, right? Dum, dum, dum. Very
Yeah.
cool. Oh my God. All right. So since you're from New York, best pizza.
Well, I could say Ray's, I mean, everyone likes Ray's, the one on 6th Avenue and 12. Not that I like pineapple pizza, but to me, I like a fresh mozzarella. Hey, NC, you still with us? A fresh mozzarella pizza. They make a really good one that you feel like you're in Italy at this place called Obeca. It's right downstairs from my studio on Broadway between 21st and 22nd. That's my current fave.
Oh, wow. I would, by the way, I would love to see the studio. That would be
Come
amazing.
over.
Yeah, man.
Okay.
And
We'll do a hang.
we'll get some fresh mozzarella. Oh man, what a great hang! I got 9 more million questions, but we'll throw those back there. We can always do it again anyway.
Cool.
Yeah. Chip Ritter, by the way, saying great show. Always good to have you, Chip. And somebody said, while working at Long Island Drum Center, I picked up your premiere set at Kennedy Airport and delivered it to your house. It was always a pleasure to help you at the store. Billy Warsh said that.
Well, the Dix Hills. Yeah, I remember. I used to have them set up in my garage because, garages are usually longer than you need them to be for your vehicle, right? So at the tip of my garage, there was the three big calzone cases, one for the kicks and the cymbals, and then the one for all the toms, and then the trap case. And they had to go into my garage. I take the car out, got to go into my garage, 1, 2, 3. And that's where my road cases lived, So that's probably what he did.
Oh,
he
my
probably
God.
stacked them.
That's crazy. All right, man. So good hanging with you tonight. I really
nice to
appreciate
hang with you too. And it's really good because I like doing these things when it's not like a stiff interview and we're just hanging and talking shit. Those are the best.
This, I try to keep this loose and just fun and just hanging. And I will mention the book again. Anybody who doesn't have this in your library, you're a loser. Go get it. What's the matter with you? And check out Beatstreet Productions. You can go to Joe's website and check that out. And there's some resources there. And just, if you have any production work going on, that's the place in New York City to go. I have a friend who's a voiceover artist and a drummer. Do you know Jim Mola?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
So I'm surprised
He's great. And he sings Italian songs.
Man.
He actually does solo dates as a singer.
He's a very talented guy, and he can play the ukulele. I don't know. That's a little known fact. He has an all Beatles ukulele record. That is true.
All right.
Great hanging, Joe.
All right, Jim. Well, great hang.
Thanks to all the people that hung with us tonight. I appreciate all the people in the chat asking questions of Joe, and I appreciate your time. And tell your wife thank you for loaning you to me this evening. And we'll talk real soon.
Sounds good.
All right, everybody. Good
Ciao.
night.